The buzzards circled low over the New Mexico desert, patient as death itself. August heat rose in waves from sand the color of old bone, distorting distance, turning the horizon into something that might have been water or might have been mirage. Elias Merrow knew better than to trust his eyes in country like this. The desert lied more often than it told the truth. He was 2 days out from Las Cruces when he saw the smoke. Not the black smoke of burning wagons or the white smoke of cook fires, but something in between. Gray, uncertain, the kind of smoke that meant trouble had already happened, and what remained was just the aftermath. His horse, a roan gelding named Steadfast, felt the tension in his legs and slowed without being asked. Animals knew when men were deciding between the safety of ignorance and the danger of knowing. Elias sat there in the saddle for a full minute, watching that smoke curl into a sky too blue to care about human suffering. 36 years had taught him that some problems were not his to solve, that a man alone with a rifle and bad memories was not required to ride toward every disaster he witnessed. The smart thing would be to turn Steadfast west toward his ranch, toward the four walls that kept the world at a manageable distance, toward the whiskey that made sleep something other than a battlefield. But Catherine's voice whispered in his memory, soft as it had been the last time he heard it. "Go help Elias. That's who you are, even when it costs you." He touched the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a ridge of tissue that caught the light and held it. The scar had been there for 4 years, since Canyon de Chelly in the autumn of 1871. Since the day he learned that following orders and following conscience were not always the same thing. Since the day his captain put a rifle to the head of a woman protecting her daughter, and Elias made a choice that ended one life and fractured his own. The smoke was 3 miles northeast. He could reach it in 20 minutes if he pushed Steadfast hard. Or he could turn away, ride home, pour bourbon into a tin cup, and pretend he had not seen anything at all. Catherine's grave was 2 years cold now. Fever, the town doctor had said. A sickness that came fast and took her faster, leaving Elias with a ranch too quiet and nights too long. But Catherine had been healthy the week before, strong, laughing. And then she was ash and memory buried under dirt that did not care what promises had died with her. Sometimes Elias thought he heard her voice in the wind. Sometimes he was certain of it. "Go help," he urged Steadfast forward. The terrain changed as he rode scrub grass, giving way to rocky ground, the earth cracked and thirsting. He passed the skeleton of a pronghorn ribs, gleaming white, picked clean by scavengers. Nature was efficient here. Nothing went to waste. Death became food, became life, became death again in cycles so old they predated human witness. The smoke thickened as he approached, and with it came the smell. Gunpowder, burned wood. Something worse underneath that he recognized but did not name. His hand moved to the Winchester rifle in its scabbard fingers, checking the action by touch alone. 30 rounds in the saddlebag. A Colt revolver on his hip with 6 more. Enough to handle most trouble, assuming trouble could be handled with bullets. He crested a low rise and saw the wreckage. A freight wagon lay on its side, canvas torn and blackened contents scattered across 50 yards of desert like a child's abandoned toys. Barrels split open, flour dusting the ground white. Bolts of cloth unrolled and trampled. A strongbox pried open and emptied. And 3 bodies, or what remained of 3 bodies, arranged in positions that suggested they had been shot while running. Elias dismounted, slow, rifle-ready eyes scanning the rocks for movement. The attack was hours old, maybe longer, but predators often returned to their kills. He had learned that in the war. Had learned it again fighting Apaches across Arizona and New Mexico territories. Death attracted death the way blood attracted flies. The bodies were white men, teamsters by their clothes, shot in the back execution style, close range. But the scene had been staged to look like something else. Apache work, an observer might conclude. Savage violence by savage people. Except Elias had fought Apaches for 4 years and knew their methods. This was theater. White men playing at being red men, counting on fear and prejudice to hide their crime. He found the boot prints near the wagon's rear axle. Cavalry issue, standard army pattern, worn smooth at the heel. The men who did this had marched in formation, had drilled on parade grounds, had stood at attention, while officers spoke of duty and honor and the civilizing mission of the United States military. Now they were thieves and killers wearing the skin of the enemy they had supposedly defeated. Elias knelt beside the tracks reading the story written in dust. 4 men on horseback coming from the south. They had waited in ambush behind the rocks, let the wagon pass, then attacked from behind. Quick, professional. The teamsters never had a chance to defend themselves. After the killing came the looting, methodical and thorough. Then the staging, arranging the scene to shift blame. A sound stopped his analysis, small, nearly nothing. The kind of noise a wounded animal makes when it has given up on living, but the body has not yet received the message. He found her tied to the wagon wheel. A woman Apache by her features, perhaps in her middle 20s, carrying the weight of someone who had survived what should have killed her. Her dress was torn, whether from violence or hard travel, he could not immediately tell. Rope bound her wrists to the wheel spokes, cutting deep enough that blood had dried in dark lines down her arms. Her left eye was swollen shut, her lips split. Bruises on her throat and the distinctive pattern of fingers, but it was her right eye that held him. Open, alert, watching him with an intensity that was not fear or hope but something colder. Evaluation. She was measuring him the way a wolf measures a rival, deciding whether to flee or fight or wait for a better opportunity. Elias approached carefully, rifle lowered but not holstered, hands visible. He had been taught that sudden movements around wounded creatures, human or otherwise, invited violence. Her voice came rough-shaped by a throat that had screamed until screaming became pointless. The words were English accented but clear, each syllable deliberate. If you mean to finish what they started, be quick about it. I am tired. He stopped 3 feet away, studying her face. She had the bearing of someone who had lived hard years, someone who understood violence and survival in equal measure. A scar curved along her left cheekbone in the shape of a crescent moon, old tissue that had healed badly without proper medical care. Another mark, fresher, split her lower lip. I am not here to hurt you, he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rusty from disuse. He spoke so rarely these days that words felt like foreign objects in his mouth. She laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping stone. Men who hurt women always say that first. It is how I know they are lying. Fair point, Elias acknowledged. But I am going to cut those ropes regardless. You can run if you want. Fight if you prefer. But sitting here tied to a wheel in the desert sun is not a path to anything but death. He moved closer, pulling his knife from its sheath on his belt. The blade was 7 inches of forged steel, honed to an edge that could split paper or bone with equal ease. He had killed 3 men with this knife in the war, had cleaned it afterward in creek water that ran red for 20 minutes downstream. The woman's good eye tracked the blade as he positioned it against the rope. Her body tensed, ready to explode into motion the moment she was free. Elias cut the first binding with a single stroke, then the second, then stepped back quickly to give her space. She did not run, did not attack. She simply sat there, rubbing her wrists where the rope had cut deepest, her gaze never leaving his face. Blood flow returning to hands that had been numb brought pain he knew. He could see it in the tightness around her mouth, the way her breathing changed. But she made no sound. Water, she said. Not a request. A statement of need. He fetched his canteen from Steadfast's saddle, offered it to her. She took it with hands that trembled slightly, a betrayal of weakness she could not quite control. She drank long and deep water, spilling from the corners of her mouth, running down her neck. When she lowered the canteen, she studied him again with that same cold assessment. You were a soldier, she said. Cavalry. 3rd Regiment. It was not a question. Elias felt ice crawl down his spine despite the desert heat. How do you know that? She pointed at the scar on his face. I have seen you before. 4 years ago. Canyon de Chelly. November cold. My people sleeping. Your people killing. You stood in a doorway with a rifle pointed at my mother who was trying to protect me. The memory hit him like a fist to the chest. He remembered. God help him. He remembered everything. The canyon walls red with dawn light. The smell of gunpowder and fear. Captain Morrison giving orders to fire on civilians to eliminate resistance before it could form. The woman, middle-aged, standing in front of her daughter, who was a young woman herself, perhaps 21 or 22, both of them frozen with terror. And Elias standing there with his rifle raised, finger on the trigger, following orders because soldiers followed orders. Until they did not. "You lowered the rifle," the woman continued, her voice flat, reciting facts without emotion. "You turned away. You let us run. I was that young woman, 22 years old enough to remember every detail, old enough to never forget." Elias felt his legs weaken. He had thought about that moment every day for 4 years. Had wondered if the woman and her daughter survived. Had hoped they had, while suspecting the massacre claimed them somewhere beyond his line of sight. "Your mother," he managed to say. Did she survive? The Apache woman's expression hardened. She lived 3 more weeks. Infection from a wound in her side, one she got while we were running from your soldiers. She held on long enough to tell me what I needed to remember. That a soldier with a scar chose mercy when mercy was forbidden. That his name was Elias Marrow. That he saved us even though it cost him everything. It did not cost me everything, Elias said, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. I was court-martialed, dishonorably discharged, lost my rank and my pension. But I am alive. Your mother is not. Whatever price I paid was not enough. The woman stood unsteady on legs that had been folded too long. She swayed, caught herself against the wagon wheel, refused his offered hand. "My name is Kinua. It means Eagle Woman, in the language my mother's mother spoke. She gave me that name because she said I would need to see farther than others to survive. I think she knew what was coming even then, Elias, though you already know that." "Yes." Kinua tilted her head, studying him from a new angle. "Why did you lower the rifle, Elias Marrow? Why choose one moment of mercy in a war built on slaughter?" "Because it was wrong." The words came without thought, pulled from some deep place he rarely examined. The order was wrong. Shooting an unarmed woman, protecting her daughter, that was not war. That was murder, and I had already done enough of that. But you did not stop the others. You only saved 2. Why not save them all? "Because I am a coward," Elias said, the admission tasting like ash. "I stopped one crime but allowed 100 others. I chose the smallest possible act of defiance, the one that let me sleep at night while still calling myself a soldier. Real courage would have been putting the rifle to Captain Morrison's head before he could give the order. But I did not do that. I waited until it was too late for most people, then saved 2 and called it redemption." Kinua absorbed this in silence. Around them the desert continued its indifferent existence. The sun climbed higher. The buzzards circled lower. Time moved forward because time had no capacity for mercy or justice or any other human concept. Finally she spoke. "You are honest about your cowardice. That is rare. Most men build walls of lies around their failures. You simply hand me yours and wait for judgment." "I am not waiting for judgment," Elias said. "I am waiting to see if you are strong enough to ride. There are men who will come back here looking for you. The ones who did this, they were not random killers. This was planned, staged. You were meant to be found dead, blamed on Apache raiders, used to justify more violence. When they discover you are gone, they will hunt you. Let them try." Kinua's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "I have been hunted before. I have been caught before. I have escaped before. I am very good at surviving, Elias Marrow. Surviving and living are different things. Come with me. I have a ranch a day's ride west. You can rest there. Heal. Decide what comes next from a position of strength instead of exhaustion." "Why would you do this?" "What do you want from me?" "Nothing." The truth of it surprised even Elias. "I want nothing from you except the knowledge that I helped when I had the chance. 4 years ago, I saved you by instinct, a moment of impulse that I have questioned every day since. Today, I can choose to help deliberately. Maybe that means something. Maybe it does not. But it is the only thing I can offer." Kinua's expression shifted, some of the hardness cracking to reveal uncertainty beneath. "Men do not help for nothing. Everything has a price. Then consider it payment of a debt," Elias said. "Your mother survived long enough to raise you, to teach you to be strong. That is 3 weeks of life I gave her, even if I could not give her more. Let me honor that by keeping her daughter alive a little longer." For a long moment, Kinua said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. "I will come. Not because I trust you, but because I am tired and wounded and practical. If you betray me, I will kill you. I want you to understand that clearly." Understood. He helped her onto Steadfast, his hands careful, his touch brief. She was lighter than he expected, her body hard with muscle earned through survival rather than comfort. She settled into the saddle with the ease of someone who had ridden horses since childhood, though these would have been different horses stolen or traded from white settlements, never fully trusted. Elias walked beside Steadfast, leading the horse west toward home, toward the ranch that had become more prison than sanctuary in the 2 years since Catherine's death. He did not speak. Kinua did not speak. The silence between them was not companionable, but not hostile either. It was simply the silence of two people who had learned that words were often less honest than the spaces between them. The sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. Shadows stretched long from every rock and shrub, creating a landscape of light and dark that shifted with each step. Elias found himself thinking about Catherine, about the last conversation they had before the fever took her. She had been lucid that morning, her eyes clear despite the heat burning through her skin. "Promise me something," she had said, her voice so quiet he had to lean close to hear it. "Anything. Do not let my death make you small. Do not shrink yourself down to fit inside grief. The world needs men who choose mercy even when mercy costs them everything. Be that man, Elias. Be the man who lowered his rifle." He had promised, though he had not understood what she was asking. Now, walking through the desert with an Apache woman on his horse, he thought maybe he was beginning to. They reached his ranch as twilight surrendered to full darkness. The house stood small and square against the night lamplight from within, casting rectangles of gold across packed dirt. Elias had built this place with his own hands after the court-martial, after the discharge, after he had married Catherine and promised her a life better than the one the war had stolen. 4 rooms, a barn for Steadfast and 2 other horses, a well that ran cold even in August, fences that kept the world at a manageable distance. Catherine had made it a home, had planted flowers that somehow survived despite the desert's best efforts to kill them, had hung curtains in the windows, had filled the silence with humming while she cooked and laughter when he said something that pleased her. Now it was just a structure again, walls and roof protecting nothing more valuable than solitude. Elias helped Kinua down from the saddle. She stood swaying slightly, exhaustion, finally catching up to the iron will that had kept her upright this long. He guided her inside to the small guest room that had once been meant for children who never came. Catherine had kept it ready anyway, fresh linens on the bed basin and pitcher, for washing a chair by the window where morning light fell, gentle and warm. "Sleep," Elias said. "The door does not lock, but you can wedge that chair under the handle if it makes you feel safer. There is food in the kitchen when you wake. I will be in the barn if you need anything." "Why the barn?" Kinua asked. "This is your house, because you are not ready to trust a man under the same roof. And I am not ready to have another person in this house hearing me wake from nightmares. The barn is better for both of us." Her expression softened fractionally. "You are a strange white man, Elias Marrow. I have been told that before." He left her there, closing the door quietly behind him. Outside, the night air had cooled enough to breathe without feeling like his lungs were being scoured clean. He tended to Steadfast first, unsaddling the gelding, brushing him down, checking hooves for stones or damage. The rhythm of the work settled something in him, made the world feel ordered and predictable in a way that human interaction never did. When Steadfast was fed and watered, Elias climbed to the hayloft where he had been sleeping for the past 6 months. A bedroll, a blanket, a bottle of whiskey that was 3/4 empty. The minimum required for a man to call what he did sleeping rather than passing out. He did not drink tonight. Instead, he lay on his back staring at darkness that was absolute, listening to sounds that were familiar. The horses shifting in their stalls, the wind moving through gaps in the barn walls, the distant cry of a coyote announcing its presence to anything that might challenge or flee. And beneath it all so quiet he might have imagined it the sound of a woman weeping in the house he no longer considered home. Elias woke before dawn to find Kinua standing in the barn doorway, silhouetted against the pre-dawn gray. She had washed, he saw, had changed into a dress that must have belonged to Catherine, simple brown cotton that hung loose on her smaller frame. Her hair, black as crow feathers, was still damp. "I am sorry," he said, sitting up. "I should have asked before assuming you would want Catherine's clothes." "Your wife," Kinua asked. "Yes, she is dead." "Yes. How long?" 2 years. Fever." Kinua nodded slowly, absorbing this information without comment. Then she crossed to the ladder that led to the loft, climbed it with surprising grace for someone who had been near death yesterday. She sat at the edge of the loft legs dangling, studying him in the growing light. "I read her diary," Kinua said. Elias felt his chest tighten. "You what last night?" "While you were here. I could not sleep, so I looked through the house, found her journal in a trunk, read it. That was private. So was my life before white men decided it belonged to them. We are past privacy, you and I. We are into truth now, whether we want to be or not." Elias wanted to be angry, wanted to feel the righteous indignation of violated boundaries, but he was too tired, and she was too correct. What did it say? That she loved you, that she feared you were killing yourself with guilt, that she wished she could make you understand that mercy was not weakness. Kinua paused, her dark eyes holding his. "And that she knew about Canyon de Chelly. She knew what you did, knew it cost you your career, knew you saved 2 people, but not enough people. Knew you carried that failure like stones in your pockets, weighing you down until one day you would drown." Catherine never said, Elias whispered, because she was wise. She understood that naming a wound sometimes makes it bleed harder. So she loved you quietly. She loved you in ways that did not require you to speak your shame aloud. And then she died, and you lost the only person who knew the worst of you and chose to stay anyway. The accuracy of it was devastating. Elias felt something crack in his chest, some carefully maintained wall crumbling under the weight of being truly seen. "How do you know this? You read her words, but how do you know what I am feeling? Because I am the same," Kinua said simply. "I carry dead people too, my mother, my father, my younger brother who was 8 years old when soldiers put a rifle to his chest and called it pacification. I carry them in my body like stones. Some days the weight is too much. Some days I think about putting myself in the ground with them just to stop the carrying. But then I remember that I survived for a reason. That my mother held on for 3 weeks so I could live. That survival is its own kind of revenge against people who wanted me erased." She lowered herself from the loft, dropped lightly to the barn floor, walked to where Elias sat, frozen in his bedroll. She knelt in front of him, close enough that he could see the crescent scar on her cheek was actually 3 scars layered together, old violence written in skin. "You saved my life twice now," she said. "Once when I was a young woman at Canyon de Chelly who will always remember. Once yesterday when I will never forget. That creates a debt in my culture. A bond that must be honored. You owe me nothing," Elias said. "I did not say I owed you. I said there is a bond. Bonds are different from debts. Debts can be paid and forgotten. Bonds remain even after payment, connecting 2 people across distance and time." Kinua reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away and touch the scar on his face. Her fingers were gentle, tracing the line from temple to jaw. "This is where your captain hit you with his rifle butt when you refused to keep shooting. I know because I asked questions. I found people who were there. I learned your story the way you would learn the story of an enemy you needed to understand before you could defeat him. I am not your enemy. No, but I thought you were. For 4 years, I thought the soldier with the scar was the one who killed my father. I thought you pulled the trigger that put a bullet in his back while he ran to save us. I was wrong." "What changed your mind last night in your wife's diary?" She wrote about the court-martial, about the testimony, about how you stood there and took the blame for Captain Morrison's death, even though it was ruled an accident. About how they asked you over and over if you murdered your commanding officer, and you said no, you were defending civilians, and they said there were no civilians. Everyone in that canyon was an enemy combatant. And you said, if children are enemy combatants, then we have lost what makes us human." Kinua's voice cracked slightly. "She wrote that you were dishonorably discharged, not because they believed you murdered Morrison, but because they believed you were right. And they could not allow a soldier to be right when the army was wrong." Elias felt tears on his face and did not remember starting to cry. "I did not kill your father," he said. "I wanted you to know that. I do not know who did, but it was not me. I know." Kinua wiped his tears with her thumb, an intimacy that should have felt intrusive, but somehow did not. "I know because I found out who really killed him. His name was Sergeant Cole Tanner. He died of whiskey poisoning 6 months after Canyon de Chelly. Apparently, guilt is poison, whether you drink it or drown in it." They sat there in the barn as dawn broke, fully painting the world in shades of rose and gold. Elias realized he was still holding Kinua's hand, realized she was crying too, realized they were two people who had spent years carrying the same stones, different stones nonetheless. "I do not know what happens now," he admitted. "Neither do I. But I know I cannot go back. The men who tied me to that wagon, they will come looking, and they are connected to something larger than random violence. I heard them talking before they left me to die. They mentioned a name, Reverend Josiah Crane. They said he paid good money for Apache women, that I was supposed to be delivered to him in Socorro, that I was worth $300 if I was unspoiled, and half that if I was damaged." Elias's blood went cold. Josiah Crane, I know that name. He runs a mission church in Socorro, preaches about saving savage souls through labor and Christian discipline. Everyone thinks he is a saint. Everyone is wrong. Kinua stood pulling Elias to his feet with surprising strength. "Reverend Crane is a slaver. He buys Apache women and children from bandits and corrupt soldiers, pretends he is rescuing them for Jesus, then sells them to mines and brothels across the territory. I know because I escaped from him once before, 8 months ago. He has been looking for me ever since." The pieces clicked together in Elias's mind with terrible clarity. "You think the men who attacked the wagon work for Crane?" "I know they do. One of them had a tattoo on his neck, a cross with a snake wrapped around it. That is Crane's mark. All his men bear it." "Then they will come here," Elias said. "They will track you here, and they will come. Yes, we should run. Get you somewhere safe. I know people in Texas who would hide you. No more running." Kinua's voice was iron wrapped in silk. "I have run from Canyon de Chelly to the reservation, to the mission, to the desert, and back again. I am done running. This time I fight. This time I make them bleed for what they took from me." "You cannot fight Crane alone. He has money. He has men. He has the law in his pocket because everyone believes he is doing God's work. Then we find proof. We expose him. We make everyone see what he really is." Kinua met his eyes. "Will you help me?" Elias thought about Catherine, about her last words about choosing mercy, even when mercy cost everything. He thought about the soldier he had been and the man he was trying to become. He thought about the fact that he had spent 2 years hiding from the world in a barn, drinking himself toward a death that would look like sleep, but would really be surrender. "Yes," he said, "I will help you." The sound of hoofbeats cut off whatever Kinua was about to say. Multiple horses approaching fast from the east. Elias grabbed his rifle, moved to the barn door, peered through the gap. 3 riders, hard men on harder horses, wearing the dust of long travel. The lead rider had a tattoo on his neck, visible even at this distance, a cross wrapped in a snake. "They found us already," Kinua whispered. "Not possible. We left no trail they could follow this quickly, unless someone told them where to look." Kinua's face went pale. "Unless they had help from someone who knows this territory, someone local." The riders stopped 50 yards from the house. The leader dismounted, called out in a voice that carried false friendliness. "Elias Marrow, we know you are in there. We mean you no harm. We are looking for stolen property, an Apache woman. Return her, and there will be no trouble." Elias felt Kinua tense beside him. She was reaching for something at her waist, and he realized with a start that she had taken one of Catherine's kitchen knives, had it hidden in the folds of her dress. "Do not," he said quietly. "Not yet." He stepped out of the barn, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. A gesture of caution rather than aggression. "I do not know what you are talking about." The leader smiled, showing teeth that had been filed to points, an affectation meant to frighten. "Come now, Marrow. We know she came here. We tracked her from the wagon. Saw your horse's hoof prints leading west. Followed them straight to your door. It was a lie. It had to be a lie." Elias had been careful, had walked on rock when he could, had brushed out tracks when he could not. These men should not have been able to follow them, unless someone had told them exactly where to find an ex-soldier living alone on a ranch west of Las Cruces. Someone who knew Elias's history, knew his name, knew his location. "Who sent you?" Elias asked. "Reverend Crane sends his regards," the leader said. "Says to tell you that he forgives your interference, but cannot allow it to continue. The woman is his property, legally purchased. Return her, and this ends peacefully. She is not property. She is a human being." The leader's smile widened. "Is that what they taught you at Canyon de Chelly? That Apache are human? Seems to me that did not work out well for your career." The insult was designed to provoke. Elias felt his finger tighten on the rifle trigger, forced himself to relax. These men wanted an excuse. Wanted him to shoot first so they could claim self-defense when they killed him and took Canoa. "I am giving you one chance to leave," Elias said. "Right away now. Tell Crane his property ran off into the desert. Tell him she died of exposure. Tell him whatever you want. But do not set foot on my land, or what you will shoot us. 3 against 1. Those are poor odds." The third rider had been silent until now. He guided his horse forward slightly, and Elias felt his blood turn to ice water. The rider was young, maybe 25, with a familiar face. A face Elias had seen before, though where he could not immediately place. "Hello, Elias," the young man said. "It has been a long time." And then Elias remembered a boy of 16 standing at attention during the court-martial. Remembered testimony given in a voice shaking with fear or excitement or both. Remembered the words that had sealed his fate. "I saw Merrill murder Captain Morrison in cold blood. I tried to stop him, but I was too late. He is a traitor and a savage lover, and he should hang." The witness who had lied. The reason Elias had been dishonorably discharged instead of merely reprimanded. The person who had taken a moment of difficult mercy and twisted it into career-ending infamy. "Private Derek Voss," Elias said. "I wondered what happened to you after the war. I found better employment." Voss gestured at his companions. "Better pay, too. Reverend Crane values loyalty, values men who understand that some people are meant to serve and others are meant to be served. You could have understood that, Elias. Could have kept your mouth shut at Canyon de Chelly, could have followed orders and retired with honors. But you chose the wrong side. I chose human decency." "You chose a fantasy." Voss leaned forward in his saddle. "There is no decency in war, only survival. And you, old friend, are about to learn that lesson one final time." The leader drew his pistol. The second rider did the same. Voss simply sat there, smiling, savoring the moment. And then Canoa stepped out of the barn kitchen, knife in one hand, and said in a voice that carried absolute certainty, "If you shoot him, you will never find what you came for." The riders turned as one gun's shifting to point at her. The leader's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "The money. The $300 Reverend Crane paid for me. I know where it is hidden. The bandits who sold me to your men, they cached it before the wagon was attacked. They knew soldiers would steal it if they found it. So they hid it. And I am the only one who knows where." Canoa's voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. "Kill me and you lose the money. Kill him and I die before I tell you. Let us both live and I will take you to it." It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff. But the riders hesitated, greed warring with violence in their expressions. "How do we know you are telling the truth?" the leader asked. "You do not. But you also do not know that I am lying. And if I am telling the truth, Reverend Crane will be very unhappy that you killed his investment before recovering his money. How unhappy do you think he will be? Unhappy enough to file your teeth down further? Unhappy enough to do worse." The leader's hand twitched on his pistol. He was calculating running odds, trying to determine if torture might extract the truth faster than negotiation. Elias saw the decision forming and acted without thought. He raised his rifle and fired a single shot into the ground at the leader's feet. The horses reared, the riders cursed, And in the chaos, Elias chambered another round aimed at the leader's chest and said, "Next one goes through meat instead of dirt. Your choice." For 3 heartbeats, the world balanced on a knife edge. Then Voss laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Elias, Elias, Elias. Always the hero, always the man who thinks one gesture changes everything. But you are outnumbered and outgunned. You cannot win this." Maybe not, a new voice said from behind the riders. But 3 against 1 is different from 3 against 4. A man stepped out from behind the barn, rifle raised. He was tall, lean, with skin the color of weathered copper, and a scar that ran from his left ear to his collarbone. He wore Apache clothing mixed with pieces of white man's gear, and his eyes held the cold patience of someone who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation. Kinua gasped. "Dakota," cousin, the man said, without taking his eyes off the riders. "I have been looking for you." Behind him emerged 2 more figures, an older man, white with a marshal's badge catching the morning light, and a woman, Chinese, holding a doctor's bag in one hand and a Derringer pistol in the other. "Marshal Caleb Stone," the lawman announced. "And unless you 3 want to explain to a federal judge why you are threatening citizens on their own property, I suggest you ride out. Now." The riders looked at each other, looked at Elias, looked at the marshal. The math had changed. 3 against 5 was different odds, bad odds. "This is not over," Voss said. "Yes, it is," Kinua replied. "Tell Reverend Crane that I am done being property. Tell him I am done running. Tell him if he wants me, he can come himself instead of sending cowards. And when he comes, I will be waiting." The riders wheeled their horses and rode east back toward whatever hole they had crawled from. Dust rose in their wake, hanging in the still morning air like a promise of violence deferred but not canceled. Elias lowered his rifle, turned to face his unexpected allies. "Marshal Stone," he said. "I was not expecting federal assistance." The marshal was a man in his 50s, gray threading through his beard eyes that missed nothing. "You should have been. I sent word 3 days ago that I was bringing backup. Got your location from the Territorial Records Office. Been tracking Crane's operation for 6 months. When I heard you had pulled an Apache woman from a wagon attack, I figured you had stumbled into something bigger than you realized." "How did you know where to find me?" Elias asked. "Your name came up in our investigation. Former soldier living alone west of Las Cruces. History with Canyon de Chelly. The kind of man who might help someone in trouble even if it complicated his life. So I gambled that if Crane's men came for the woman, you would not hand her over quietly." "You gambled correctly," Elias said. Stone gestured at Kinua. "Miss, you are going to need to come with me. Answer some questions. Let me determine what exactly is happening here." "No," Kinua said simply. Stone's eyebrows rose. "That was not a request. And my refusal was not a negotiation." Kinua's voice carried iron certainty. "I have been questioned by marshals before. I have been examined by judges before. I have been processed and documented and stamped and filed before. And every time the system has decided I am property or criminal or problem to be solved. Never human, never victim, never worthy of protection. So, no, Marshal. I will not go with you. I will stand here on Elias Marrow's land and dare you to drag me off it." The standoff might have continued, but the Chinese woman stepped forward. She set down her medical bag, holstered her Derringer, and extended a hand to Kinua. "I am Dr. Miriam Hightower. I am not with the marshal. I am here because someone needs medical attention, and I do not let politics determine who I treat. May I examine you?" Kinua studied the offered hand, then slowly accepted it. "You are Chinese, and you are Apache. We have that in common, being people the law does not quite know what to do with." Dr. Hightower smiled gently. "Also, I suspect you have rope burns on your wrists that are going to get infected if not properly cleaned, and possibly a concussion from the blow to your head. Am I wrong? No. Then let me help. Not because the marshal asked, not because Elias asked, but because I took an oath that said all people deserve healing regardless of who they are or what they have done. And I actually believe that oath means something." Kinua nodded slowly. "I will accept your help, Doctor." The Apache man, Dakota, had not moved. He stood watching Elias with eyes that held complicated calculations. Finally, he walked forward, stopped 10 feet away, studied the scar on Elias's face. "You are the soldier," Dakota said. "The one from Canyon de Chelly?" "Yes." "The one who let my cousin live when she was young?" "Yes." "The one who killed his captain to stop the massacre?" "I did not stop it. I slowed it." "There is a difference." "There is," Dakota agreed. "But you tried." "That is more than most white soldiers could say." He extended his hand. "I am Dakota, Kinua's cousin. I have been searching for her for 8 months since she escaped from Reverend Crane's mission. I owe you a debt for keeping her alive until I could find her. You owe me nothing. Then consider us even. You saved her once. I am here to help save her now. That makes us allies, whether we want to be or not." Elias took the offered hand, shook it. The grip was firm, callous, the hand of a man who had worked for everything he possessed and trusted nothing given freely. Marshal Stone watched this exchange with an expression that suggested he was recalculating everything he thought he knew. Finally he sighed. "I am going to regret this. But fine. For now I am willing to believe that Miss Kinua is a victim rather than a criminal. But that means we need to talk. All of us. Because if Reverend Crane is doing what you suggest, if he is running a slave operation under cover of missionary work, then we have a situation that requires more than rifles and good intentions." "What do you propose?" Elias asked. "We build a case, we gather evidence, we find witnesses, and we take Crane down legally through the courts in a way that sticks." Stone looked at each of them in turn, but that requires trust and cooperation, and all of you being willing to put aside whatever grievances you carry long enough to see justice done. Can you do that? Elias looked at Kinua. She looked at Dakota. Dakota looked at Dr. Hightower, and slowly, one by one, they nodded. The sun had climbed high now, burning away the last of the morning cool. The ranch that had been Elias's prison was suddenly full of people, full of purpose, full of something that might have been hope, if hope had not seemed like such a dangerous thing to carry. Inside the house, while Dr. Hightower tended to Kinua's wounds, and Marshal Stone took notes, and Dakota kept watch at the window, Elias found himself standing in front of Catherine's trunk, the one that held her diary, the one Kinua had read without permission. He opened it slowly, lifted out the leather-bound journal, turned to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky fever, making the letters waver and drift. But the words were clear. "My dearest Elias, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I hope you can forgive me. I am not dying of fever. I am dying of a choice. The army came 3 days ago. They say they have new evidence about Canyon de Chelly. They say they are reopening the investigation. They say this time you will hang for treason and murder. I cannot bear to watch that happen, so I am choosing to leave first. The laudanum was easy to obtain. The pain will be brief. Please do not blame yourself. Please remember that I loved you. Please find the woman you saved that day. Her name was Morning Dove. Find her family. Tell them you are sorry. And then, my love, forgive yourself. You have carried this stone long enough. Put it down. Live." The journal fell from Elias's hands. Catherine had not died of fever. She had died to protect him, had poisoned herself, so the army would close their investigation, so they would have no leverage, so he could live free even if it meant living alone. He felt Kinua's presence before he heard her. She stood in the doorway, bandages white against her wrists. Dr. Hightower behind her. "I should not have read it," Kinua said quietly. "I am sorry." "No." Elias's voice came from somewhere far away. "You should have. Because if you had not, I would never have opened it. I would have died without knowing that the last 2 years were built on a lie. That she sacrificed herself, and I honored that sacrifice by hiding, by shrinking myself down to fit inside grief, by becoming the smallest possible version of who I could be. She wanted you to live. She wanted me to live large, to choose mercy, to find Morning Dove's family, and say sorry." Elias looked up, met Kinua's eyes. "Your mother was Morning Dove." "I know." "Then I am sorry. I am sorry I could not save your father. I am sorry I could not save more people. I am sorry that my one moment of mercy was too small and too late and too little." Kinua crossed the room, knelt beside him, took his hands in hers. "Your mercy was not too small. It was exactly the right size. It saved me. It saved my mother long enough for her to teach me how to survive. It saved you from becoming a monster. And now it has brought us here to this moment where we have a chance to save others. That is not small. That is everything. Outside, Dakota called a warning. More riders approaching, many riders this time. Elias stood, moved to the window, prepared himself for whatever came next. But these riders wore federal blue. Captain Marcus Webb led 2 squads of cavalry, 30 soldiers strong, riding under orders that had been sent days before Elias ever found Kinua tied to that wagon wheel. Marshal Stone had planned this from the beginning, had used them as bait, yes, but had also provided protection, had gambled that Crane would move against them and in doing so expose himself to federal intervention. The trap had been set, and now it was time to spring it. Captain Marcus Webb dismounted with the efficiency of a career soldier, his boots hitting the packed earth with authority that came from 20 years of commanding men in hostile territory. He was 45, weathered by sun and combat, with eyes that had seen enough death to recognize the signs of violence about to happen and intervene before it became irreversible. "Marshal Stone," he said, saluting, "we received your telegram 4 days ago, brought 2 squads as requested. What is the situation?" Stone gestured toward the house where Kinua stood visible in the window, then at Elias, then at Dakota, who had not lowered his rifle. "Reverend Josiah Crane is running a slavery operation disguised as missionary work, buying Apache women and children from bandits and corrupt soldiers, then selling them to mines, brothels, and private buyers across the territory. We have a witness, multiple witnesses actually, and we have evidence that Crane's network extends into federal jurisdiction." Webb's expression hardened. How extensive? 4 territories at minimum, dozens of transactions over the past 5 years. Conservative estimate puts the number of victims at over 800 people. 800. Webb let the number settle, let it acquire the weight it deserved. That is not an operation. That is an industry. "One that ends today," Stone said. "We ride to Socorro. We shut down Crane's mission. We arrest everyone involved. And we do it with enough force that resistance becomes suicidal." "You are certain about this?" Webb asked. "Because if you are wrong, if Crane actually is running a legitimate missionary operation and we attack it with federal troops, the political consequences will be severe. The territorial governor will have your badge. The newspapers will crucify us. And every actual slaver in the Southwest will use it as proof that the government persecutes good Christians." "I am certain," Stone said. "And I have proof." He produced a leather folder from his saddlebag, spread documents across the porch railing. Ledgers showing payments received and disbursed, correspondence between Crane and buyers detailing specifications for merchandise, receipts listing people by age, gender, and condition as if they were livestock, and photographs, dozens of them, showing wagons loaded with chained prisoners, transactions taking place in alleyways, guards surrounding compounds that looked more like prisons than missions. "Where did you get these?" Webb asked, studying the evidence with the careful attention of someone who understood that details mattered in ways that decided whether men lived or died. "From someone inside Crane's organization who developed a conscience," Stone said. "Someone who realized that what they were participating in was not salvation, but damnation. They have been copying documents for 6 months, smuggling them out piece by piece, building a case that even corrupt judges cannot dismiss." "Who?" Dr. Hightower stepped forward. "A bookkeeper named Samuel Archer. He came to me 3 months ago with symptoms of what I diagnosed as acute moral distress manifesting as physical illness. Said he could not sleep, could not eat, was having nightmares about ledgers that listed children under livestock expenses. I treated him for the immediate symptoms and then asked what was really wrong. He told me everything." "And where is Mr. Archer now?" Webb asked. "Dead," Dr. Hightower said quietly. "Died 2 weeks ago, officially ruled a suicide. Unofficially, I believe he was murdered when Crane discovered he was the leak, but before he died he gave me everything, every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence needed to dismantle the entire operation." Webb absorbed this, his face showing the calculation of a man weighing evidence against politics, justice against pragmatism. Finally he nodded. "We move at dawn tomorrow. 2 squads plus whatever local support Marshal Stone can arrange. We surround the mission. We secure all exits. We arrest Crane and everyone who works for him, and we do it fast enough that they cannot destroy evidence or harm prisoners." "Not Dawn," Kinua said from the doorway. "Now, today, before Crane learns that his men failed to recover me, before he realizes federal authorities are involved, before he has time to prepare or flee." Miss Webb said with the careful courtesy of someone addressing a person whose status he had not yet determined. "I appreciate your urgency. But military operations require planning, reconnaissance, coordination. We cannot simply ride into Socorro and attack a fortified compound without understanding what we face." "I understand what you face," Kinua said, walking onto the porch with Dr. Hightower hovering protectively beside her. "I lived in that compound for 6 months. I cleaned every building. I knew every guard. I mapped every exit and hiding place because I knew one day I would need to escape. The mission has 20 men on staff, 12 guards, 8 overseers. They work in shifts, 4 guards on duty at any time. The rest sleep in barracks on the north side. The armory is in the chapel basement. Food stores are kept in the main building. And Reverend Crane's office, where all the original documents are stored, is on the 2nd floor of the church tower, accessible by a single stairway that can be blocked or defended." Webb studied her with new assessment. "You are very well informed. I am very motivated to see Crane destroyed." Kinua met his gaze without flinching. "And I know that if we wait until dawn, we give him hours to prepare. His men who came here will return and report. Crane will realize something has gone wrong. He will begin destroying evidence and moving prisoners. By the time you arrive at dawn, you will find an empty compound and smiling guards who claim they have no idea what you are talking about." "She has a point," Stone said. "Speed matters more than perfect planning in this case." Dakota stepped forward. "I have 15 Apache warriors waiting 2 miles north, men who escaped from reservations or refused to go in the first place, men who have been preparing for this moment. We can support your soldiers, guide you through terrain, help secure the compound from the inside while you attack from the outside." Webb looked at Stone. "You are asking me to coordinate a military operation with Apache warriors and Chinese doctors and disgraced ex-soldiers based on evidence from a dead bookkeeper and the testimony of an escaped slave. Do you understand how irregular this is?" "Completely," Stone said. "But irregular does not mean wrong. And everything in those documents is verifiable. Give me 2 hours to ride into Socorro and speak with townspeople. I guarantee I will find witnesses who have seen things that confirm what Kinua is telling us. Families who have lost daughters. Workers who disappeared from the mission and were never heard from again. Business owners who purchased labor from Crane and paid in cash so there would be no record." 2 hours, Webb agreed. "But I want scouts around that mission now. I want to know exactly what we face before we commit. And if I find that this is some elaborate trap or misunderstanding, I will court-martial everyone involved and let the territorial governor sort it out afterward." "Understood," Stone said. The next 2 hours unfolded with the controlled chaos of military preparation. Webb detailed scouts to observe the mission from a distance. Stone rode into Socorro with Dr. Hightower to gather witnesses and confirm Kinua's testimony. Dakota disappeared north to gather his warriors. And Elias found himself alone with Kinua, standing in the ranch yard, watching soldiers prepare for violence that felt both necessary and terrible. "You do not have to come," Kinua said quietly. "You have done enough, saved my life, given me shelter, helped bring federal authorities. No one could ask for more." "I am not doing this because anyone asked," Elias replied. "I am doing it because Catherine told me to live large, to choose mercy, to be the man who lowered his rifle. And that man does not walk away when people need help, even if it means riding into battle again, even if it means killing, especially then, because the only thing worse than violence is violence unopposed." Crane built his empire on the assumption that no one would fight back, that people like you were disposable and people like me would look away. It is time to prove him wrong. Kinua took his hand, laced her fingers through his. "When this is over, when Crane is arrested and the prisoners are freed and the evidence is presented in court, what happens to us, you and me, this thing between us? Is it just shared danger and temporary alliance? Or is it something more? Elias thought about Catherine, about the love they had shared and the guilt he had carried since her death. He thought about the walls he had built to protect himself from feeling anything again. And he thought about the fact that Kinua had demolished those walls simply by existing, by being honest about her pain, by refusing to let him hide in comfortable isolation. "It is more," he said. "I do not know exactly what. I do not know if it is wise or possible or anything other than two broken people reaching for each other in the dark. But it is more." "Good," Kinua said, "because I am tired of being alone, tired of surviving without living. And you, Elias Marrow, you make me want to live instead of just survive." They stood together in the afternoon sun, two people who had been shaped by violence and were now choosing connection, holding hands like it was the bravest act they could perform. Marshal Stone returned as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. His face carried the grim satisfaction of someone who had found exactly what he expected and wished he had been wrong. 23 witnesses, he reported to Captain Webb, families who lost daughters to raids that were blamed on Apache, but whose descriptions match Crane's men. Workers who were hired through the mission and never paid. Business owners who purchased labor and were told the workers had volunteered when clearly they had not. And a former guard who quit after watching Crane beat a woman unconscious for refusing to work. He is willing to testify. Willing to provide details about operations protocols and the network of buyers. "That is sufficient for federal warrants," Webb said. "We move at sunset. Use the failing light to approach unseen. Surround the compound. At full dark we breach the gates and secure all personnel before they can organize resistance." "What about the prisoners inside?" Elias asked. "If shooting starts, they are trapped in the crossfire. That is why we move fast and overwhelming," Webb said. 2 squads is 60 soldiers against 20 mission staff. The math is simple enough that even stubborn men will surrender rather than die. "Crane is not a stubborn man," Kinua said. "He is a true believer. He genuinely thinks God has sanctioned his work. He will not surrender because surrender would mean admitting he was wrong, and men like Crane would rather die than admit error." "Then we plan for that," Webb said grimly. "Non-lethal force where possible. But if he resists, if anyone resists, we do what is necessary to protect the innocent and complete the mission." They rode out as the sun painted the desert in shades of blood and gold. 60 cavalry soldiers in disciplined formation, 15 Apache warriors moving like shadows at the edges, Marshal Stone and Dr. Hightower riding with the main force, and Elias beside Kinua, both of them armed, both of them silent, both of them preparing for violence that felt inevitable. Takota rode up beside them as Socorro appeared on the horizon. His face was painted for war traditional markings that transformed him from man to symbol, a reminder that this fight was older than Crane's mission, older than the territory, older than the nation that claimed dominion over land. It had taken by force. "When we breached the compound," Takota said, "I am going for Crane personally. I have waited 8 months for this, tracked him across 4 territories, gathered evidence and witnesses and warriors. Tonight, I collect the debt he owes my people." "Stone will want him alive," Elias said, "for trial, for justice." "Justice and revenge are not opposites," Takota replied. "Sometimes they are the same thing wearing different clothes." They approached Socorro from the west, using the terrain to mask their numbers, scouts confirming that the mission had not increased its guard force or shown any sign of preparation. Crane did not know what was coming, did not know his empire was about to collapse. Captain Webb divided his forces with the precision of someone who had done this before. 1 squad to the front gate, 1 to the rear wall, Apache warriors scattered around the perimeter to catch anyone who tried to flee. Marshal Stone and Dr. Hightower with the command group. And Elias and Kinua assigned to the squad hitting the front gate because Kinua knew the layout and Elias knew how to fight. They waited in the growing darkness as the sun finally surrendered to night. Stars emerged in a sky too clear and too beautiful for what was about to happen. Elias checked his rifle for the 3rd time, confirmed rounds were chambered, confirmed his hands were steady despite the fear climbing his spine. Kinua touched his arm. "Are you afraid, terrified?" he admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you alive. Confidence gets you killed." Captain Webb raised his hand, held it. The world seemed to stop breathing. Then his hand dropped and everything moved. The front squad hit the gate with a battering ram, iron-reinforced wood splintering under repeated impacts. Guards appeared on the walls, raising rifles, but Apache warriors fired first, forcing them down. The gate broke on the fourth impact, and soldiers poured through, moving with practiced efficiency, splitting into teams that cleared buildings with speed that left no time for organized resistance. Elias moved with the flow, Kinua beside him, heading for the church tower where Crane's office waited. They encountered their first resistance at the chapel entrance. 2 guards who raised weapons and were immediately disarmed by soldiers who hit them with rifle butts and bound them before they could recover. The stairway to the second floor was narrow and dark, a perfect choke point for defense. Elias went first, rifle ready, expecting bullets or ambush, but the stairs were empty. Too empty, as if someone had deliberately left them unguarded. They emerged into Crane's office to find the Reverend sitting behind his desk, calm as a man awaiting expected guests. He was burning papers in a metal trash bin, flames casting dancing shadows across walls lined with books and crosses and documents that proclaimed faith while concealing greed. Reverend Crane Elias said, rifle aimed center mass. Stand up slowly. Put your hands where I can see them. Crane smiled, the expression carrying no warmth and no fear. Mr. Merrow. And Miss Kinua, how delightful. I had hoped you would come. Saves me the trouble of hunting you down. You are under arrest, Kinua said. Federal charges, human trafficking, conspiracy, violations of laws prohibiting slavery. Slavery. Crane laughed, a sound like wind through a graveyard. I am a minister of God. I save savage souls from damnation. I teach them the ways of civilization and Christ. If some of them are placed in productive employment, that is simply good stewardship of the Lord's flock. You buy people and sell them, Elias said flatly. That is slavery regardless of what you call it. I call it God's work. Crane pulled more papers from his desk, fed them to the flames. And God's work will continue long after you have arrested me, long after your federal authorities have investigated and prosecuted and congratulated themselves on their righteousness. Because the demand exists, people need workers. The economy requires labor, and Apache sitting idle on reservations serve no one. I simply facilitate a market that would exist with or without me. Facilitating slavery is still slavery, Kinua said. Crane's eyes shifted to her, cold and assessing. You are an interesting case study, Miss Kinua. Educated, articulate, proof that my methods work. You could have been a productive member of society, a servant in a good Christian household, earning your place through honest labor. Instead, you chose to run, chose to steal, chose to align yourself with criminals and degenerates. Such a waste of potential. I chose freedom, Kinua said, something you cannot sell because you do not understand what it means. Freedom is an illusion, Crane replied. Everyone serves someone. Everyone is owned by something. I simply make the arrangements explicit and profitable. Enough, Elias said. Stand up. Put your hands behind your head. Crane stood, but his hands did not move toward his head. Instead, they reached for something inside his coat. Elias saw it happening, saw the motion, recognized the intent. Do not, he called out, but Crane was committed. His hand emerged holding a derringer, small but deadly at this range. He aimed not at Elias but at Kinua, his face twisted with rage that came from righteousness denied. If I cannot have you. No one will, Crane said. Elias fired without thought, without hesitation, without the moral weight that usually accompanied killing. The bullet caught Crane high in the chest, spinning him backward, the derringer falling from his fingers. He collapsed against his desk, slid to the floor, blood spreading across his white collar in a stain that looked like judgment. Dr. Hightower rushed through the door seconds later, her medical bag already open. Her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She checked for pulse, examined the wound, looked up at Elias with an expression that mixed professional assessment with human sympathy. He is alive, she said. Barely. We need to get him to a hospital if we want him to survive long enough to stand trial. Let him die, Dakota said from the doorway. Let him bleed out on his own floor. It is more mercy than he deserved. No, Kinua said quietly. We do this legally. We let him stand trial. We let the world see what he was. If he dies now, he becomes a martyr. If he lives and is convicted, he becomes a cautionary tale. Dr. Hightower worked quickly, packing the wound, applying pressure, issuing orders to soldiers who had followed her up the stairs. They carried Crane out on an improvised stretcher, his face pale, his breathing shallow, his eyes open and staring at nothing. The rest of the mission fell without significant resistance. 20 staff members arrested, 42 prisoners freed, documents seized before they could be destroyed, and a network exposed that would lead to arrests across multiple territories. But it was what happened afterward that Elias would remember most clearly. The freed prisoners emerged from barracks and workrooms into the compound courtyard, blinking in lamplight like creatures who had forgotten what freedom looked like. Some wept, some stood silent and frozen. Some asked if this was real or just another form of torture. And Kinawa moved among them, speaking in Apache and broken Spanish and careful English, telling them it was over, they were safe, they were free. Elias watched her transform from survivor to leader, from victim to liberator, and understood that this was what Catherine had meant about living large. Not grand gestures or heroic moments, but the daily choice to help. When help was needed, to stand when standing mattered, to refuse the comfortable numbness of looking away. Marshal Stone approached with documents salvaged from Crane's office. We have everything he said, complete records going back 5 years, names of buyers, sellers, intermediaries, correspondence with territorial officials, proof of bribes paid to judges and sheriffs. This is going to implicate some very powerful people. Good, Elias said. You understand what that means, Stone continued. These powerful people will fight back. They will use their influence to discredit the investigation. They will hire lawyers who will argue that the evidence was obtained illegally. They will drag this through courts for years. And they will make your life and Kinua's life and the life of every witness extremely difficult. I understand. And you are willing to see it through, to testify, to stand up in court and face men who have the resources to destroy you. Yes. Stone nodded slowly. Good. Because we are going to need you, all of you. A commotion near the gate drew their attention. A rider had arrived, expensive horse, expensive clothes, the kind of man who was used to being important and having that importance acknowledged. He dismounted with the careful movements of someone who had spent more time in boardrooms than on horseback, adjusted his coat, and walked directly to where Captain Webb was coordinating the arrest processing. I am Thomas Brennan, the man announced, owner of the Silver King Mine. I am here to collect my workers. I have contracts, legal documents. I paid good money for their labor, and I expect them to be returned to me immediately. Elias felt his blood freeze. Thomas, his younger brother, the boy he had left behind when he went to war, the man he had not seen in over a decade, standing here in Crane's compound claiming ownership of human beings. Thomas turned, scanning the crowd, and his eyes found Elias. Recognition flickered, followed by surprise, followed by something that might have been pleasure if pleasure could coexist with guilt. Elias, my God, is that you? Hello? Thomas, Elias said, his voice flat. What are you doing here? Thomas walked closer, arms extended as if to embrace. I heard you were in the territory, but I never imagined. He stopped, taking in Elias's rifle, his position beside Kinua, his presence with the federal troops. Wait, are you part of this? This raid? Yes, but why? These people are criminals. They are disrupting legal commerce. They are interfering with contracts that have been properly executed and filed. The contracts are for the purchase of human beings, Elias said. That makes them illegal, regardless of how properly they were filed. Thomas's expression shifted from friendly to defensive. You do not understand how business works out here. The mines need labor. The Apache on reservations are idle and unproductive. Crane's mission provides a solution. Workers get employment and structure. Mine owners get reliable labor. Everyone benefits. Except the workers who did not choose to be sold, Kinua said, stepping forward, who were stolen from their families, who were chained and beaten and worked until they died or escaped. Where is the benefit in that? Mr. Brennan Thomas looked at her, really looked, and something in his face changed. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. You, he said slowly, you are the one who escaped, the one Crane was preparing for me. He said you spoke English, that you were educated, that you would be worth the premium price. Kinua's hand moved to the knife at her belt. "You paid $1,000 for me, double the usual rate. What did you plan to do with me that was worth so much money?" Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I needed someone who could serve as translator and liaison with Apache workers. Someone who understood both cultures. It would have been a position of trust and responsibility." "In your household," Kinua said, "where I would have been isolated, dependent on you for everything, unable to leave or seek help because who would believe an Apache over a wealthy mine owner? That is not employment. That is slavery with extra steps." "You are twisting things," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. Elias stepped between them. "Thomas, you purchased human beings. You participated in Crane's operation, knowing or willfully ignoring what it really was. That makes you complicit. That makes you guilty." Thomas stared at his brother. "You cannot be serious. I am family. Blood? You would side with strangers over your own brother. I am siding with human decency over slavery. The fact that my brother is on the wrong side of that line is disappointing, but not surprising. You always did choose profit over principle. That is rich coming from the man who destroyed his own career by killing his commanding officer." Thomas shot back. "You lecture me about principle, you who got dishonorably discharged, who lives alone in the desert drinking himself unconscious. You are going to judge me." "Yes," Elias said quietly, "I am. Because my failures do not excuse yours. My mistakes do not make your crimes acceptable. And blood does not obligate me to protect you from consequences you earned." Marshal Stone had been listening to this exchange. Now he stepped forward. "Thomas Brennan, you are under arrest for human trafficking conspiracy and participation in a criminal enterprise. You have the right to remain silent." "This is absurd," Thomas protested. "I have lawyers, I have influence, I know the territorial governor personally." "Then you can mention that when you write him from federal prison," Stone said. "Take him." Soldiers moved forward. Thomas tried to back away, tried to appeal to Elias one more time. "Please, Eli, we are brothers. You cannot let them do this." "I am not letting them do anything," Elias replied. "I am helping them do it. There is a difference." As Thomas was led away in chains, Kinua touched Elias's arm. "That was your brother." "Yes, that must have been difficult." "No," Elias said, surprised by the truth of it. "It was necessary. And necessary is often easier than difficult because there is no question about what must be done." The night wore on with the tedious work of documentation and processing. Prisoners were catalogued, staff were interrogated, evidence was inventoried, and slowly a picture emerged of an operation that had operated for 5 years with the tacit approval or willful ignorance of multiple levels of government. Dr. Hightower worked tirelessly treating injuries both recent and old, documenting evidence of abuse that would become part of the prosecution. She found scars from whips, burns from punishment, bones broken and healed badly. And in every case she recorded what she found with clinical precision while offering comfort with human compassion. Dakota coordinated with his Apache warriors to provide security and to help identify prisoners who wanted to return to reservations versus those who wanted to establish new communities. He moved among the freed people like a shepherd among scattered flock, gathering them, reassuring them, helping them imagine futures that were their own to determine. And Elias found himself sitting in the compound courtyard in the early morning hours, exhausted and wired, watching the stars fade as dawn approached. Kinua sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, her breathing slow and even. "We did it," she said quietly. "Did we?" Elias asked. "Crane is arrested, but probably will not survive his wounds. Thomas is arrested, but has money for lawyers. The evidence is strong, but the powerful people implicated will fight back. The freed prisoners are safe tonight, but tomorrow they face a world that does not want them. Did we actually accomplish anything? We proved that resistance is possible, that systems can be challenged, that people who believe themselves untouchable can be held accountable. That is not nothing. It feels like not enough. Of course it does. Justice always feels insufficient because it cannot undo harm already done. It can only prevent future harm and provide consequences for past harm. But that still matters. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky lightened, as the stars disappeared, as the desert prepared for another day of heat and hardship and small beauties that existed despite everything. Marshal Stone found them there as the sun cleared the eastern horizon. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but also with satisfaction. Reverend Crane died 20 minutes ago, never regained consciousness. Dr. Hightower did everything possible, but the wound was too severe. So he escapes trial, Kinua said. But not judgment, Stone replied. The evidence is already being distributed to newspapers. The story is being told. Within a week, everyone in the territory will know what Reverend Josiah Crane really was. His name will be synonymous with slavery and hypocrisy. That is not the justice system provides, but it is a kind of justice nonetheless. What about the others? Elias asked. The buyers. The officials who enabled this. We have arrest warrants being prepared. Federal prosecutors are being brought in. This is going to take months, maybe years, but we will pursue every name in those ledgers. We will hold everyone accountable. And the people who were freed, what happens to them? That is up to them. Some want to return to reservations where they have family. Some want to stay in Socorro and build new lives. Some want to establish settlements independent of both reservation and White Town. We will provide resources for all of those options. Transportation, food, medical care, legal support, whatever they need to have a real choice about their futures. Kinua pulled Elias to his feet. We should help with that, the organizing, the supporting, making sure promises become actions. Stone smiled slightly. I was hoping you would say that. Because, frankly, you two are the only people these freed prisoners trust. They know you fought for them, bled for them, put yourselves at risk. That carries weight that federal badges and military ranks cannot match. So we stay, Elias said. For as long as they need us, for as long as it takes, Kinua agreed. They spent the next week in Socorro coordinating the aftermath. Families were reunited where possible. Transportation was arranged for those returning to reservations. Land was identified for those wanting to establish new communities, and medical care was provided for injuries, both physical and psychological. On the seventh day, standing on a ridge overlooking the valley where a new settlement would be built, Elias asked the question that had been building since the night they freed the mission. What happens to us? When this is done, when the settlements are established and the trials are over and life returns to something resembling normal. Kinua turned to face him, her expression serious but not uncertain. I want to marry you, Elias Marrow. Not because I owe you, not because we survived something together, but because these past weeks have shown me who you are when everything is difficult. And I want to spend my future with someone who chooses mercy even when mercy is hard. I loved Catherine, Elias said. I will always love Catherine, I know. And I will never ask you to stop. She was your wife. She shaped who you are. Honoring her memory honors you. Kinua took his hands. But she is gone. And we are here. And building something new does not erase something old. It just adds to the sum total of love in a world that needs more of it. Elias pulled her close, held her, felt tears on his face, and did not care. Yes, he said. Yes, I will marry you. I will stand with you. I will build with you. I will choose mercy and hope and connection over grief and guilt and isolation. They married 3 months later in a ceremony that blended Apache tradition with frontier pragmatism. Reverend Hart officiated, having traveled from Las Cruces specifically for the occasion, despite his advanced age and failing health. Dakota performed Apache blessings. Dr. Hightower stood as witness alongside Marshal Stone, and Derek Voss attended with his wife and daughter, the child's laughter, a reminder that redemption was possible even for those who had participated in evil. The settlement they had helped establish stood as backdrop to the ceremony. 12 families who had claimed adjacent land and were building a community that existed outside the binary of reservation and White Town, a place where Apache traditions could be maintained while incorporating elements of surrounding culture that proved useful. A bridge between worlds that had been at war so long neither side remembered what peace looked like. After the ceremony, Elias stood with Kinua, looking at what they had built together. Houses stood where empty land had been. Fields showed the first green of planted crops. Children played in dirt that would become gardens, and people moved with purpose rather than fear, building futures they controlled rather than endured. "Do you think Catherine would approve?" Kenua asked. Elias thought about his first wife, about her strength and kindness, and belief that he could be better than his worst moments. He thought about the letter that had told him to find Mourning Dove's family and make amends. He had found Mourning Dove's daughter, had fallen in love with her, had built a life beside her. Yes, he said with certainty. She would approve completely. She would say, "This is exactly what living large looks like." "And what about you?" Kenua asked. "Do you approve? Are you happy?" Elias considered the question seriously. Happiness felt too simple a word for the complex mixture of emotions he carried. Grief for Catherine existed alongside love for Kenua. Guilt for what he had not saved at Canyon de Chelly coexisted with pride in what he had saved since. Regret for his brother's choices lived beside hope for the community they were building. "I am content," he said finally. "I am purposeful. I am connected to something larger than my own pain. That is better than happy. That is enough." They stood together as the sun set over New Mexico territory, over land that had witnessed too much violence, but was learning peace, over communities that were teaching themselves that the past did not have to determine the future, that mercy was not weakness, that choosing connection over isolation was the bravest act humans could perform. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Another answered. The ancient conversation continued, speaking of survival and adaptation, and the relentless insistence of life to persist against odds designed to extinguish it. And Elias Merrow, who had once been a soldier following orders, who had become a widower hiding from guilt, who had finally transformed into a man choosing mercy deliberately and repeatedly, held his wife's hand and believed for the first time in years that tomorrow might be better than today. Not perfect, not easy, but better. And sometimes better was enough. The federal trials began in Albuquerque 6 months after the raid on Crane's mission. The territorial courthouse, a building designed to project authority through stone and ceremony, filled daily with spectators who came to witness something that had never happened before: wealthy white men being held accountable for crimes against Apache people. Elias sat in the gallery beside Kenua, watching prosecutors present evidence that Dr. Hightower and Marshall Stone had spent months organizing into a case that even corrupt judges could not dismiss. Ledgers showing 800 transactions over 5 years, correspondence detailing specifications for human merchandise, testimony from freed prisoners describing conditions that met every legal definition of slavery, and photographs, dozens of them. Images that made the audience gasp and the defendants shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Thomas Brennan sat among the accused, his expensive suit unable to conceal the fact that he had lost weight during his imprisonment, that his confidence had eroded under the weight of evidence that could not be argued away with money or influence. He had not looked at Elias since the trial began, had not acknowledged his brother's presence in the courtroom or his role in the investigation that led to these charges. The prosecution called its next witness. Kenua stood, smoothed her dress, walked to the witness stand with the same steady composure she brought to everything. She had testified twice already, once about her own experiences and once about the mission's operations. Today she would testify about the buyers, about the men who had purchased human beings and called it commerce. The lead prosecutor, a man named Samuel Harrison, who had traveled from Washington specifically for this case, approached the stand. "Miss Kenua," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. "Do you recognize the defendants?" "Yes." She looked directly at Thomas, her expression neutral, but her eyes holding everything she felt. "I recognize Thomas Brennan. He came to Reverend Crane's mission 3 times. The first time he purchased 5 workers for his mine. 3 women and 2 boys. I never saw them again." "Objection," Thomas's lawyer called out. "Hearsay. The witness cannot know what happened to these alleged workers." "Sustained," the judge said. "The jury will disregard the last statement." Harrison continued. "Can you describe Mr. Brennan's second visit to the mission?" "He came looking for someone specific, a young woman who could serve in his household, someone educated, someone who spoke English. Reverend Crane showed him 6 women. He chose my friend Maria. She was 17. She hanged herself 6 months later. Objection. The lawyer was on his feet again. Your Honor, this is inflammatory speculation designed to prejudice the jury. It is testimony about observed facts, Harrison countered. The witness saw Thomas Brennan select a person. That person died while in his employment. These are facts, not speculation. I will allow it, the judge said. But Mr. Harrison, please confine your questions to what the witness directly observed. Harrison nodded. Miss Kinua, did there come a time when Mr. Brennan expressed interest in purchasing you? Yes, his third visit. He offered Reverend Crane $1,000, double the usual rate. He said he wanted someone who could serve as translator and liaison with Apache workers at his mine. And did you agree to this arrangement? No, I escaped before the transaction could be completed. Why did you escape? What made you believe you needed to flee? Because I knew what happened to women who went to work for men like Thomas Brennan. They disappeared. They were isolated in households where no one could hear them scream or see them suffer. They had no legal rights, no protections, no way to seek help. And if they resisted or complained, they were punished or killed, and the law looked the other way, because Apache women are not considered fully human under territorial practice, even if we are under federal law. The courtroom erupted. Spectators shouted. The judge banged his gavel. And Thomas Brennan sat frozen, his face pale, his hands gripping the table in front of him hard enough that his knuckles went white. Order. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. I will have order or I will clear this courtroom. The noise subsided. Harrison waited until silence returned. Miss Kinua, in your observation, did Thomas Brennan know he was purchasing human beings rather than contracting free labor? Kinua looked directly at Thomas. Yes, he knew. Everyone knew. The pretense was thin. The contracts were fraudulent. The workers were chained. They were guarded. They were punished for attempting to leave. No one who witnessed these things could honestly claim to believe it was voluntary employment. Thank you. No further questions. Thomas's lawyer stood for cross-examination. His name was Edmund Caldwell, one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the territory, a man who had built his career defending wealthy clients from consequences they richly deserved. Miss Kinua, he said, his tone dripping with condescension, you claim my client knew he was purchasing slaves. But is it not possible he was deceived by Reverend Crane, that he genuinely believed the workers were volunteers being placed in productive employment? The lawyer's eyebrows rose. You seem very certain, but you cannot read minds, can you? You cannot know what my client believed. I can know what any reasonable person would have believed, given the evidence available. Your client saw workers in chains. He saw guards with weapons. He saw women who flinched when men approached. He saw children who would not make eye contact. These are not the behaviors of volunteers. These are the behaviors of prisoners, perhaps. Or perhaps he saw people being protected from their own savage impulses, people being taught discipline and structure. Kinua's expression did not change, but something in her eyes went cold and sharp. If you believe Apache need to be chained and beaten to learn discipline, Mr. Caldwell, then you have confessed to precisely the racism that made Crane's operation possible. You have admitted that you do not see us as human beings capable of making our own choices. And that admission proves my point better than any testimony I could provide. The gallery erupted again, this time with applause. The judge banged his gavel, but Elias saw him fighting a smile. Even here, in a system designed to protect wealth and power, truth had a way of breaking through. The trial continued for 3 more weeks, witness after witness, document after document. The prosecution building a case so comprehensive that even the most skeptical jurors could not ignore it. And when the final arguments concluded, when the jury retired to deliberate, Elias found himself standing outside the courthouse with Kinua, both of them exhausted, both of them uncertain what verdict would emerge. Do you think they will convict? Kinua asked. I do not know. The evidence is overwhelming. But these are white men being accused of crimes against Apache people. Juries have ignored stronger cases for weaker reasons. Then we prepare for disappointment, or we hope for justice, one or the other. They returned to the hotel where they had been staying during the trial, a modest establishment that catered to federal employees and their witnesses. The owner, a widow named Mrs. Sarah Colton, had been kind despite the prejudice that surrounded Apache presence in white spaces. She had given them her best room and refused payment, saying that anyone fighting slavery deserved support. In their room, Elias found himself pacing while Kinoa sat by the window, watching the street below. The waiting was worse than the testimony had been. At least during testimony, there was purpose, action, the sense that they were doing something. Now there was only time and uncertainty. "Tell me about the settlement," Kinoa said suddenly. "Distract me with plans for the future." Elias stopped pacing, joined her by the window. 12 families have claimed land. Dakota is coordinating the building. Dr. Hightower has agreed to establish a clinic. Marshall Stone arranged for federal funds to purchase tools and seed. By spring, they will have houses and fields and the beginning of something permanent. And us. Where do we fit in this, wherever we are needed most? Teaching, maybe. Helping people navigate the legal systems that govern land ownership and water rights. Serving as translators between cultures that still do not speak each other's languages very well. That sounds exhausting. It sounds purposeful. And purposeful is better than comfortable. Kinoa took his hand. "I am glad I found you, Elias Marrow, or you found me, or we found each other. However it happened, I am glad." "So am I." They sat together as the sun set, as the street below emptied, as Albuquerque settled into evening routines that had nothing to do with trials or justice or the fates being decided in a courthouse 3 blocks away. The verdict came 5 days later. The jury foreman, a rancher named William Price, stood to read the decision in a courtroom so silent that breathing sounded loud. On the charge of human trafficking, we find the defendant, Thomas Brennan, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to violate federal laws prohibiting slavery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. The foreman continued through 18 separate counts. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each word landing like a hammer blow, each verdict fracturing the assumption that wealthy white men were above consequences. When it finished, when all the verdicts had been read, Thomas Brennan sat motionless, staring at nothing. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but Thomas shook his head. He stood slowly, turned, and for the first time since the trial began, looked directly at Elias. "I hope you are satisfied," he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "You destroyed your own brother, destroyed your family name. For what? For people who will never thank you, for a cause that will never remember you." Elias stood to respond. "I destroyed nothing. You built your wealth on slavery. You participated in evil. You earned every consequence you are about to receive. The fact that we share blood does not obligate me to protect you from justice." Justice, Thomas laughed, bitter and broken. "There is no justice in this, only revenge, only the satisfaction of self-righteous people who think they are better than everyone else." "If believing slavery is wrong makes me self-righteous," Elias said quietly, "then I accept that label gladly." Thomas was led away by federal marshals. His sentence would come later, but everyone knew what it would be. 15 to 20 years in federal prison, confiscation of all assets obtained through slavery, a name that would be synonymous with shame for generations. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Elias and Kinoa, asking questions, seeking statements, trying to capture the significance of verdicts that would echo across territories. "How do you feel about your brother's conviction? What message do you hope this sends? Will you continue your work with freed prisoners?" Elias answered, with the careful precision of someone who understood that words mattered, that what he said today would be quoted in newspapers from St. Louis to San Francisco. "We hope these verdicts send a clear message that slavery is unacceptable regardless of how it is disguised, that human trafficking will be prosecuted under federal law, that wealth and influence do not place anyone above accountability." And your brother, a reporter pressed, "Do you have any sympathy for him?" "I have sympathy for the person he could have been if he had chosen differently. But I have no sympathy for the crimes he committed. Justice is not about sympathy. It is about consequences that match actions." "Miss Kinoa." Another reporter called, You were nearly sold to Thomas Brennan. How does it feel to see him convicted? Quinoa considered the question. It feels like a beginning, not an ending. Convicting one man does not dismantle the systems that made his crimes possible. There are still judges who will ignore evidence, still buyers who will purchase people, still corrupt officials who will facilitate trafficking. This verdict matters, but it is one step in a much longer journey. What comes next for you? Building. She gestured toward where Dakota stood at the edge of the crowd. My cousin and I, and many others, are establishing a community for Apache who refuse reservation life but have nowhere else to go. A place where we can maintain our culture while adapting what is useful from the surrounding world. That is the real work, not trials or verdicts, but creating futures where trials like this become unnecessary because the conditions that enabled slavery no longer exist. The reporters scribbled furiously. This was better copy than they had hoped for, not just legal victory, but vision for what came after. That evening, back at the hotel, they received an unexpected visitor. Derek Voss stood in the doorway, holding his daughter, the child sleeping against his shoulder, despite the noise of the celebration happening in the hotel's common room. I wanted to thank you, Voss said quietly, for giving me the chance to testify, for letting me tell the truth even though I had spent years lying, for showing me that redemption is possible if you are willing to do the work. You did the work yourself, Elias said. All we did was not stop you. Still. Voss shifted his daughter's weight. I have been thinking about what comes next, about how I spend the rest of my life making up for the years I wasted serving men like Crane. And I have a proposal, which is, I have money saved, not a fortune, but enough. I want to donate it to your settlement, help fund the school Dr. Hightower mentioned, provide resources for families who need tools or seed or animals. It is not payment, it is not redemption, it is just what I can offer. Quinoa stepped forward. Why? Because my daughter will grow up in this territory, and I want her to grow up in a world where people like you have the same opportunities as people like her, where skin color does not determine whether you deserve education or land or justice, where the mistakes my generation made do not poison her future. We will accept your donation, Quinoa said, and we will use it well. But more than money, we need people willing to stand up when standing up matters. We need witnesses who will testify when trafficking is discovered. We need voters who will elect officials committed to enforcing laws that protect everyone. Can you do that? I can try. Then that is payment enough. Voss left with his daughter, walking into the Albuquerque night with the careful steps of someone who had discovered that carrying guilt was harder than confronting it, but that confronting it was the only path to putting it down. The months that followed were filled with the unglamorous work of building something permanent from temporary victories. The settlement grew as more families arrived, drawn by stories of Apache who had refused both reservation and assimilation, who were creating third path that honored tradition while embracing change. Elias and Quinoa divided their time between the settlement and trips to other territories where they testified in additional trials where they helped federal prosecutors build cases against the network of buyers and sellers that Crane's ledgers had exposed. It was exhausting work, frustrating work. Work that often ended in disappointment when juries acquitted or judges dismissed charges on technical grounds. But sometimes they won. Sometimes justice prevailed. And those victories, small and hard, fought accumulated into something that began to look like change. On a spring morning almost a year after the raid on Crane's mission, Elias woke to find Quinoa standing in the doorway of their small house at the settlement, one hand resting on her belly where new life was growing. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, husband." She turned to face him, her expression carrying the mix of joy and fear that came with bringing children into a world that remained dangerous. "I have been thinking about names. Already, we have months yet. Names are important. They shape identity. They carry meaning across generations. Our child will be born between worlds, Apache and white. They will need a name that acknowledges both without privileging either. What do you have in mind?" "For a girl, I was thinking Catherine. To honor your first wife, who told you to live large, who sacrificed herself so you could be free, who led you in her way to me." Elias felt his throat tighten. Catherine would have liked that. would have liked you. And for a boy I was thinking Samuel, after the bookkeeper who died to expose Crane, who chose conscience over comfort, who gave us the evidence we needed. Both good names, both people worth remembering. Kinua crossed to where he sat, took his hands in hers. I am afraid, Elias. Afraid of bringing a child into this world. Afraid they will face the same hatred and violence we have faced. Afraid I cannot protect them. I am afraid too, he admitted, but fear is not a reason to stop living. It is just the price we pay for loving things that matter. Do you think we can give them a good life? A safe life? Safe? No. The world is not safe, and pretending otherwise would be a lie. But good, yes. We can give them community. We can give them education. We can teach them to be strong without being hard to be gentle, without being weak to choose mercy, without being naive. We can give them the same thing Catherine gave me and your mother gave you. The belief that they matter, that their choices matter, that building something better is always possible, even when it seems impossible. That is a heavy burden to put on a child who is not yet born. It is the only burden worth carrying. Everything else is just weight. They stood together watching the settlement wake around them. Smoke rising from morning fires. Children emerging to play before the day's work began. Adults moving with purpose toward fields and workshops and all the ordinary labor that transformed survival into thriving. Dakota approached from the direction of the communal kitchen carrying a basket of fresh bread. His face had softened over the months, the hard edges worn smooth by the daily work of building instead of fighting. He had found something approximating peace in creating structures that would outlast him. Morning, cousin, he said to Kinua, then nodded to Elias. Letters came from Albuquerque. Marshal Stone writes that 3 more buyers have been arrested. Evidence from Crane's ledgers. The network continues to unravel. Good, Kinua said. Every arrest is another brick in a wall that protects people from being sold. Stone also writes that your brother has requested a meeting, Dakota said to Elias. Thomas Brennan wants to see you, says he has something to say before he is transferred to federal prison in Kansas. Elias felt his chest tighten. I have nothing to say to him. Perhaps he has something to say to you. Sometimes the guilty need to confess as much as the wronged need to hear confession. That sounds like wisdom you learned from Red Skywalker. The elder taught many things before he passed. One was that forgiveness is not for the person who harmed you, it is for yourself. Carrying hate is heavy. Letting it go makes everything lighter. I do not hate Thomas. I simply have no space in my life for him anymore. Then tell him that. Give him truth. Sometimes that is the greatest gift we can offer. Elias considered this. Finally he nodded. I will go, but Kinua comes with me. Always, she said. They traveled to Albuquerque the following week, arriving at the federal holding facility where Thomas awaited transfer. The building was stone and iron designed to communicate permanence and inevitability. Guards led them through corridors that echoed with emptiness to a small room where Thomas sat at a table, hands shackled, his expensive clothes replaced with prison gray. He looked older, diminished. The confidence that wealth had provided had drained away, leaving someone who was discovering that identity built on money and status was fragile when those things were stripped away. Elias Thomas said, Thank you for coming. This is Kinua, Elias said. My wife. Anything you want to say to me, you can say in front of her. Thomas looked at Kinua, something complicated moving across his face. Shame, perhaps, or recognition of how close he had come to destroying her. I owe you an apology for trying to purchase you, for participating in a system that treated you as property, for convincing myself it was acceptable because everyone else was doing it. Apologies are words, Kinua said. What matters is what comes after. What you do with the time you have left, whether you become someone different or simply someone who got caught. I have been thinking about that, about who I was and who I might become. Thomas turned to Elias. I wrote to Mother, told her everything, confessed my crimes, asked for her forgiveness. What did she say? That she is ashamed of me, that the son she raised would never have done these things, that somewhere between leaving St. Louis and building my empire, I became someone unrecognizable. She is right. I did become someone else, someone I do not want to be anymore. Prison will give you time to work on that, Elias said. 15 years. I will be 53 when I am released. Everything I built will be gone. My name will be notorious. What do I do with that? You build something different. You become someone who helps instead of exploits. You spend the second half of your life balancing the scales from the first half. It will not be enough. It can never be enough. But it is better than remaining who you were. Thomas absorbed this. Then he looked at Kinua again. I understand you are pregnant. Congratulations. Thank you. When your child is born, will you tell them about me? About the uncle who tried to purchase their mother? If they ask, I will tell them the truth, that you participated in evil, that you were caught and punished, and that you spent the rest of your life trying to make amends. Truth is complicated, but children can handle complicated better than adults often assume. I suppose I deserve to be the cautionary tale. We all become cautionary tales eventually, Elias said. The question is what lesson the tale teaches. Yours can teach that wealth without morality leads to ruin, or it can teach that people can change if they are willing to do the hard work of becoming better. You get to choose which version of the story you write with the rest of your life. The visit ended. Guards led Thomas away to await transport to Kansas, where he would spend the next decade and a half learning whether redemption was possible or just another comfortable lie people told themselves to make guilt bearable. Outside, walking through Albuquerque streets, busy with commerce and ordinary life, Kinua asked, Do you think he will change? I think he will try. Whether trying is enough, I cannot say. Does it matter to you personally? Whether your brother becomes better? Elias thought about it. No, it does not matter to me. I have let him go, released him from the space he occupied in my life. What he does now is his business. Mine is building something with you. Good answer. They returned to the settlement as summer arrived in full-force heat that made work difficult but not impossible, that reminded everyone that survival in this country required adaptation and persistence. The first crops were harvested. The school opened with Dr. Hightower teaching medicine and Elias teaching reading and mathematics and Kinua teaching Apache language and history. And on an August morning that was almost exactly 1 year after Elias had found Kinua tied to a wagon wheel, she went into labor. The birth was hard. Dr. Hightower attended with the practiced calm of someone who had delivered hundreds of children and knew that panic helped no one. Elias held Kinua's hand and felt useless in the way that men always felt useless during childbirth, able to witness but not participate, able to offer comfort but not relief. After 6 hours that felt like 6 days, a child emerged into the world with lungs strong enough to announce displeasure at the transition from womb to air. Dr. Hightower worked quickly, clearing airways, checking responses, bundling the newborn in clean cloth. A daughter, she announced, placing the baby in Kinua's arms. Perfect. Healthy. Loud. Kinua looked down at the tiny face, at features that were both familiar and entirely new, at the person they had created from love and hope, and the stubborn belief that bringing life into a broken world was still worthwhile. She is beautiful. She is perfect, Elias agreed, his voice thick with emotions he could not name. Hello, Catherine, Kinua whispered to the baby. Welcome to the world. It is complicated and difficult and often cruel, but it is also full of people who will love you, who will fight for you, who will teach you to be strong and kind and brave. Your grandmother, the first Catherine, she wanted your father to live large. We will teach you to do the same. The baby stopped crying, seemed to listen, as if she understood that these words mattered, even if their meaning would take years to comprehend. Dakota appeared in the doorway, his face showing rare open emotion. May I? Kinua nodded. He crossed to the bed, looked down at his new cousin, and smiled. She will be a warrior. I can see it already. Strong like her mother, stubborn like her father. The spirits have blessed her. Over the following weeks, the settlement celebrated the birth with ceremonies that blended Apache tradition with frontier practicality. Red Skywalker's successor, an elder named Silver Fox, performed blessings. Reverend Hart traveled from Las Cruces to offer Christian prayers. And the community gathered to welcome the newest member, to pledge their support, to affirm that this child would be raised not just by two parents, but by an entire village. On Catherine's naming day, when she was 4 weeks old, Kinua stood before the gathered community and spoke words that would be remembered. This child is born between worlds, Apache and white. She will face prejudice from both sides, will be told she is not Apache enough or not white enough, will be forced to choose loyalties that should not require choosing. But we will teach her that being between is not being less, that bridges connecting worlds are stronger than walls dividing them, that her existence proves different peoples can create something beautiful together. The community responded with affirmation in multiple languages, voices overlapping, creating harmony from diversity. And Elias, holding his daughter, felt Catherine's presence as clearly as if she stood beside him, felt her approval, felt her satisfaction that he had finally learned what living large meant. Not grand gestures or heroic moments, but the daily choice to build instead of hide, to connect instead of isolate, to choose hope, even when hope seemed foolish. The years that followed were not easy. The settlement faced droughts and conflicts with neighboring ranchers and continued prejudice from townspeople who wanted Apache removed or controlled. Federal support was inconsistent. Promises made were not always kept. Progress came slowly, measured in inches rather than miles. But progress came. More families joined, more houses were built. The school expanded. Dr. Hightower trained apprentices who could provide medical care when she was traveling to other communities. Takota established trade relationships with Mexican merchants and white ranchers who valued fair dealing over racial prejudice, and the settlement became known as a place where different cultures coexisted not through erasure, but through mutual respect and adaptation. Elias and Kinua raised Catherine with the same careful balance they brought to everything, teaching her Apache traditions and white education, taking her to the reservation to learn from elders, and to Las Cruces to learn from books, showing her that identity was not binary, that she could claim all of her heritage without privileging one over the other. On Catherine's 5th birthday, Derek Voss arrived with his family for the celebration. His daughter Elena, now 8, had become Catherine's favorite playmate during the Voss family's regular visits. The two girls ran through the settlement unbothered by differences of culture or history, their laughter a reminder that the next generation did not have to carry the same burdens as the one before. "She is growing fast," Voss observed, watching the girls play. "Too fast," Elias agreed. "Some days I look at her and see my wife. Other days I see Catherine, my first wife. Mostly I see someone entirely new, someone who will be better than either of us. That is what we hope for all our children, that they take the good we give them and leave behind the mistakes." They sat in companionable silence, two men who had been on opposite sides of a court-martial, now united in the common purpose of building futures for children who deserved better than the past. Kinua joined them carrying a letter. It arrived this morning, from Thomas. Elias took it, read quickly. His brother wrote from federal prison in Kansas, describing his work teaching other prisoners to read his participation in a program that provided legal assistance to inmates who could not afford lawyers, his slow journey toward becoming someone different. He asks if he can write to Catherine when she is older, Kinua said, to tell her his story, to serve as the cautionary tale he promised to become. "What do you think?" Elias asked. "I think truth is better than silence. Even when truth is ugly, especially then, we can let her read his letters when she is old enough to understand them. Let her decide for herself what lessons they teach." Agreed. The celebration continued into evening, the settlement gathering for food and music and stories told in multiple languages by people who had learned that survival required community. That community required acceptance. That acceptance required the daily choice to see humanity in faces that looked different from your own. As the sun set, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of fire, Elias found himself standing apart from the celebration, watching his daughter play with children from a dozen different backgrounds, watching Kinua move among the community with the easy authority of someone who had earned respect through action rather than inheritance. Catherine's voice whispered in memory one last time. "You did it, Elias. You lived large. You chose mercy. You built something that matters. I am proud of you." And Elias Marrow, who had been a soldier and a widower and finally a man who chose connection over isolation, felt the weight he had carried for so many years finally lighten, not disappear completely. Some burdens remained permanent, but they no longer defined him. He had been the man who lowered his rifle. He had become the man who raised a daughter, and in the space between those two choices he had discovered that redemption was not a destination, but a direction. Not something achieved, but something practiced daily through small acts of courage and larger acts of love. The future remained uncertain. The settlement would face challenges. Catherine would grow up in a world that often valued convenience over justice. The systems that had enabled slavery would not disappear overnight, but they had built something: a community, a family, a bridge between worlds that had been at war. And sometimes, Elias thought as he watched the sun set on another day of choosing mercy over hate, sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything.